Historia today.
Why do you sound so mad?
I can't help it.
Hi, guys.
Oh, I'm Jamie.
I'm Kylie.
God,
We would think after like 31 episodes, we'd know what we're doing.
I think we have 32, 33.
33. Oh, no.
33.
30-something.
It's currently 9:47 p.m.
On a Saturday evening.
And I am tired. But you know what? I am excited. This is going to be a fun episode this week. I'm super excited.
Yes. It's going to be a good one. I kind of know what it is.
What?
Something about Egypt.
Can you guess who?
No, because I don't remember who.
You don't know anything about Egypt.
I don't remember who we already talked about. So,
I've only done Hatshepsut.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, this week I actually took from 3 different books because I like to use different sources and I have a shit ton of Egypt books, so I couldn't choose just one. The first one is Egyptian Mythology, A Guide to the Gods, Goddesses, and Traditions of Ancient Egypt by Geraldine Pinch.
Okay.
I took again from Ancient Egypt, An Introduction by Salima Ikram.
Okay.
And then I took this giant...
That is a big
huge book. It's the Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt by the editor Helen Rudwick.
Wow.
This book is huge, but I freaking love this book. I got it for $4 at a bookstore.
Dang.
Yeah. And it has like a shit ton of pictures in it of just
What a
like
skill.
everything. Yeah. Bookstores, honestly, going to those, because I think we have several here in the Springs that are just like discounted bookstores. Mm-hmm. You can find some amazing history books there. Like sometimes it's like hit or miss. I've gotten a few actually from the library where they did this like $5 just fill this bag up of just like these books, and I got a shit ton of cookbooks and history books.
Nice.
I got so many, and I only had to pay $5, and it was probably worth over like $250.
Hell yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so this one though for $4 was a steal. These other two I actually got cheaper, but they were my books that I actually had to use for my ancient Egypt class.
Yeah, and
they have been so helpful in explaining a lot of the information that I got for this week. So I'm going to start with this. I'm going to start with a story.
I love your books.
I know, since we moved into the house, I have gained 2 new bookshelves. So one side is just all of my puzzles, and then the other side is just all of my history books, and then the bookshelf that I have here in the office are just like all of my just casual reading books that I have. And it still takes up a lot of space on my bookshelf. So
yeah, it's great being in our new studio.
Yes, it
really feels like home in here.
I know, it's very nice and warm. I put my Scentsy.
Yeah.
So it smells decent.
One day I'm going to get a chair. Right now I'm sitting on like a hard chair. But like...
I built that from IKEA.
Oh man, see, Jamie built this chair from the ground up.
Yeah, it sucked. I put it on backwards first.
You should have left it on backwards.
It's stupid, but...
We were trying to put together a bunk bed for my niece and nephew yesterday.
Aww.
It was a mess. We did something wrong. Well, first of all, don't leave me in charge of the instruction manual. Like, I tried, but somehow it still got messed up. So, we put a piece on backwards. I don't know. I guess I had to leave, but I guess they fixed it. But anyway.
Aw, bunk beds are fun.
Yeah.
I always enjoyed it. I always wanted to be on top. Until, like, you had to pee in the middle of the night, and then you would have to, like, crawl down.
Because I was when I was in college, like, my freshman year, we had the lofted beds.
Oh, yeah.
So I was, like, on the top, because we didn't have room to lower our beds in our room. Because we had like, our desk and our dresser under them. So, like, having to get down from that every morning, like, it was hard to get up in the morning. I'm like, I don't want to, like, go down this ladder.
Trying to be quiet, and then you have your roommate.
Yeah.
It's just a whole thing. Okay.
Not the rest of the years I had my bed lowered, so. Because I had a room to myself.
That is nice.
Yeah. Alright, life.
Okay, Ruby. You need to chill.
Ruby just tried to talk into the microphone.
She is our manager. She just wanted to let everybody know that she says hi.
She's our meow-mager.
Meow-mager.
Or meow-mager. I guess that makes sense.
Want to make a noise? No? Okay.
Ruby, make a noise!
Ruby.
Or else we'll get a new manager.
Hey.
There we go.
Okay.
She purred. We're good. It's Jamie's cat, by the way.
Yes, if you haven't, you can go find a picture on Instagram of her.
Yes. It's very iconic.
She's so cute. Okay. Are you ready to hear my story?
Yes. Let's dive on in.
In the golden age of Egypt, a pharaoh by the name of Osiris ruled.
Oh.
He was a good king, good to his people, his land, and to his sister wife, Isis.
Okay.
Thanks. Gods during this time ruled the land, but he ruled the physical land of Egypt with productivity and growth. Excuse me. The only one who seemed to disapprove of this ruler was his brother Seth.
Oh.
Seth was jealous and wanted kingship to himself. He wanted him out of there. An idea came to mind, and Seth decided he would murder his brother.
Oh, scandalous.
He took matters into his own hands. Concocting a beautifully decorated casket, Seth showed up at a party Osiris was hosting with a bunch of his closest people, with casket in tow. Each guest tried to fit into the casket, but none would fit perfectly. It's like a Cinderella story going on. Like, the shoe wasn't fitting.
Oh, no.
Osiris would be asked to try after many times, and finally, he would agree. And as he laid in it, it was a surprise to all but Seth. He fit perfectly.
Oh, shit.
Immediately, Seth slammed the lid and threw Osiris in the coffin into the Nile. If you don't know anything about the Nile, that shit is gator infested.
Oh, yeah. Gator Central.
Here, the king would drown. The casket would travel through the Mediterranean Sea to Byblos and catch in a tree. Isis, mourning her husband and Seth's now ruler of Egypt, decided that she needed to do something. She needed to search for her husband. And that's what she did.
Oh.
She traveled far and wide searching for her husband. Finding him in this tree, she was ecstatic. She returned him back to Egypt. Here, Seth discovered of this news and was deeply upset. He was pissed. This news from Seth, he decided he needed to take his hands to destroy Osiris again.
Yeah.
Osiris was not alive at this point. But Isis had ideas. So Seth would retrieve his body. Some way. And cut his body up into pieces.
Ruby's getting so scared of me to laugh. She's like, don't hit me, Mom!
So cutting him up into pieces, he would spread them all throughout Egypt. Through places that would be hard to find. Isis and her sister Nymphis, in retaliation, would search for all of the pieces. In time, finding all such pieces, she would start putting them back together.
Oh my god.
In his corpse. So they started just like...
It's like a dinosaur fossil.
Yeah, they just started piecing him back together.
Looks like a stegosaurus.
The only original piece that could not be returned was his penis. Like if that was... A fish ate it. So they had to make one.
They made one?
Yeah, it was the final piece.
What did they make it out of?
I don't know.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so they had to make the penis.
There's things that they're like, wait, we're missing something. What is it? She's like,
And once they finally...
Wait, how did they know a fish ate it?
they knew. That's just part of the story.
They guessed.
Yeah, it was a big fish.
I'm sure it was a fish.
Yeah, a fish ate it, and I think they found the fish that had the penis, and it was like because it was in like his stomach, it was like destroyed.
He just like pooped it out.
Quit eating my book. Okay. After putting that final piece.
Why is that the only thing that the fish ate? I'm sorry, but just grabbed it.
That's just the story.
I'm sorry, you can't just say something like that and then move on. I'm trying to process it.
I think that's just what happened.
Oh my god.
It's interesting, let me tell you that. After placing the original piece on the body, the king was resurrected.
Oh shit.
Oh.
Was his penis fake now?
Kind of. I don't know. Like, he's still like some sort of god. So,
yeah.
I mean, it worked because I have some interesting news to tell you.
Okay.
In return of her king and husband, she turned into a black kite bird.
Oh.
And mated with Osiris.
Okay.
So they had welcome back sex.
Nice.
Isis would become pregnant with their son Horus. She would raise Horus in Memphis, he growing to defeat his uncle Seth. Between the battles, Horus would become victorious and eventually become the ruler of the Black Land of Egypt. So they would fight for 80 years. So Horus can take back the throne. Because Seth during this time ruled Egypt.
Yeah.
And so they would fight consistently. Osiris is kind of like in the background, just like, hey.
Dang.
Yeah. So at this point, this is where Osiris would pretty much get his role. Osiris in his resurrection would be granted king of the underworld. Osiris would determine those who would be awarded eternal life.
Ah.
That is the legend of Osiris.
I can't get over the penis. I'm sorry. I just feel like this fish had to have like choked on it.
No.
It was such a big fish.
I mean, those fish are pretty big in the Nile.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because it's I can't remember what kind of fish they said it was. Because I looked it up because I was also interested about this. When I read it, I was very intrigued.
Yeah. Because
I was just like, why were they so intrigued by the phallus? But I guess like
when it goes missing, you gotta find it.
Yeah, and I don't know. I really don't know the significance of why they did that, but then again, it's just like this story has been retold so many times and it's shifted so many times through the years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just I don't know. Maybe that's just like
crazy.
A big thing. Yeah. So
story number 2?
No.
Oh, it's not over.
No. So that's why that was the end of the story. So today we are talking about Osiris, the king / god of the underworld.
Ooh.
Yes. I always enjoyed Osiris because he is such an interesting character, unlike anybody, because he got his title from dying.
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Beating the legend of Osiris, he's more than the king of the underworld. In mythology, Osiris is the son of earth god Geb, the sky goddess Nut. We see him on obelisks, murals, etc., depicted as a mummified man wearing an etif crown, holding a crook and flail, and skin colored black or green. Do you know what a crook and flail is? Crook. It's like that. It's kind of like, I'm trying to explain it. So it's like 2 sticks that, because if you've ever seen like on King Tut, a lot of pharaohs, they have these specific, being a pharaoh, a crook and flail is like the number one thing that you always have in like your photographs and stuff. It's when they cross it, it's normally the things that they're holding.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so the crook is like the kind of like the this half circular shape thing.
Yeah.
And then the flail is like the three kind of God, it's really hard.
I can picture it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
okay, cool.
Yeah, he's always holding that, and yeah, he's always in a white kind of mummified being, and then yeah, I've seen most of the photographs that I've seen of that are on like the obelisks or the murals that are like in the tombs and stuff. I've only really seen him with green skin. I haven't seen him with black skin all that often, but it is a common thing that he is depicted with black skin as well.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. The crook stands for kingship and the flail, fertility. So these two things were very important to the pharaohs because the fertility, it doesn't even mean about children and stuff like that. Fertility to ancient Egyptians means more than that. It's not only to like their beings, but also to their land, because ancient Egyptians are super connected with their land. Sense. Yeah. Okay. It's really important to them. His appearance represents the regeneration of plant life, and he symbolizes judgment in one's being into the afterlife. So he has multiple he's had multiple, like, he symbolizes multiple things. Like, it's not just death. It's also growth and, reproduction in the sense of just bringing stuff to life.
Okay, yeah.
Like, he's more than just a death god, in a sense.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like the Egyptians are really heavy on their gods having more than one meaning, which I really, like, appreciate. I'm here for it. So, beginning of the myth, from as far as record shows, on the Osiris myth derived all the way back to the Old Kingdom. So his myth goes back to like the beginning almost, that we know, kind of like as far as we know for ancient Egypt, the establishment of it, the Old Kingdom, that they had records of him. But we don't see a lot of written records because a lot of times people couldn't read them because they were in hieroglyphs or we hadn't found them yet. But you see a lot of Greek and Roman historians start to go over to Egypt and start to understand more of ancient Egypt society. As we can see because there's written records of it. Of course, a lot of them are biased because it's from their point of view and not from the ancient Egypt's point of view. So it's like, take with it what you will. Right. But the factual things of like these stories, they can be changed over time because of how they perceived them as well. Sense, yeah. But what you find though on the walls, that's how they saw it. That's how we perceive it now instead of what freaking Herodotus said, because his is questionable. Now, the written record was of Osiris by the Greek historian Plutarch. So he pretty much wrote the first idea of Osiris to everybody else, of just like, this is who they believed in and their afterlife and who controls it, because to them it was Hades. Oh, yeah. Whereas for them, it was Osiris, and they saw him differently, even though with Hades, they saw him different. Yeah. They're all going to be a little different. Exactly. It was this myth that created the Egyptians to believe in resurrection and who judges in the afterlife. So resurrection is huge because you either, when crossing over, you either resurrect into this new being into your afterlife, or you go into living just something happily. When deceased, such a person would go to the judgment hall, and Anubis, gatekeeper, would take the heart of the deceased and weigh it against the feather of Mot. So I did a little bit searching of Mot because I think some people would have questions about it. But Mot is kind of this being who resembles the judgment and purity of I'm not sure if it's really a goddess, but like she resembles all of that. And so people try to live up to Mott.
Oh, okay.
To be a just, wise, and good person.
Okay.
And so they pretty much, when you're in the judgment hall, they take your heart, and that has like how you have been your entire life.
Yeah.
They put it on like a scale, and the feather of Mott, of just like, how have you lived this just life? They weigh it against it. And if it like evens out, then you're good to go. But if your heart goes down and the feather goes up, you're screwed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Egyptians took this idea very serious, as they believed after death, if they lived by Mott, they would be able to be resurrected and live in an eternal afterlife. So they would be happily ever after. And I didn't write this down because I don't know why, but I believe from the history or my memory of what I learned in my ancient Egypt class, was that if you did not live up to Mott and you got to that point of, because I'm going to talk about it, but you would have to go through these different trials to get to that judgment hall. And if you did not live up to it, you were swallowed by like a monster.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So you were like damned, pretty much.
Love that.
So it's like, you gotta live a good life or you're screwed.
Right. No turning back.
Yep. Preserving the body of the deceased was the first important thing after death. This is where we see ancient Egyptians mummified. Mummifying would be ideal, as it would preserve the body as a vehicle into the afterlife. So they did this to make sure that, and they heavily did this for the royals, as we have seen from King Tut's tomb, is that making sure you have everything to help you into the afterlife. And your body was very important to that, because it drove as like your body is put together so you can enter into it and beat those trials and end up in the eternal.
Okay.
Once mummified, one would be able to cross. The person is believed to go through multiple tests of other gods, and if passed, would go to the judgment hall of Osiris. If one would pass his tests, they would enter the afterlife, also known as the fields of Uaru/Imenti. So that is huge. It's very important that you reach these afterlife, because if you don't, then you're kind of screwed. If you don't pass the test either, then you're kind of like in a limbo of like, you're not going to reach that. And so you're just kind of there.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it's not fun. A guide into the afterlife is more than mummifications and the tests. Funerary texts were also used to help guide one into the afterlife. So it's more than just your vehicle. It's also, what can I do to help me get there, and how can I survive these tests? These texts were there to protect, guide, and help. These were mostly spells that would deflect and ward off any negativity along the deceased journey through the trials. The earliest known texts were found inscribed in pyramids, giving them the name pyramid texts. So it would just be written on like the wall, inside the walls, because a lot of them were tombs in the pyramids. So they would be just written in there to like help guide them. Because pyramids were
the place
to be, because a lot of them, with pyramids, what I was reading is that in the Old Kingdom, that's when the pyramids were being built, because a lot of, when you are a pharaoh, your entire reign, you are building consistently. And in the Old Kingdom, a lot of them would build the pyramids because that was their big, like, this is for me. This is like what I'm leaving behind. And so this them being buried in with the pyramid would be like, this is me and what I have created in my reign. And they did that for like the several pyramids, but over time, everything has shifted.
Oh, that makes sense. I was always like, how did they appear?
Yeah, and building them was difficult. Because people are like, oh my god, the aliens built them. It's like, no.
Yeah, it was obviously the aliens.
There was... It took a lot of freaking power and a lot of time. So the earliest known texts, the early texts found were of the royals, but the late period, the texts were starting to appear for non-royals. By the Middle and New Kingdom, the text started to appear on sarcophagi. So on all of the sarcophagus, like the caskets and stuff that they had, we could see a lot of them started to have those like in scriptures. And people knew this because as they started to learn the hieroglyphs, a lot of them started to repeat themselves. And so that's how a lot of that's how a lot of Egyptologists discovered that, oh, well, this is a consistent thing that's on a lot of these, like on the walls, obelisks, in the tombs, and on the sarcophagi and stuff now. This would change the name to coffin texts. So you have the pyramid text, you have the coffin text. It's just...
A whole thing.
The more of these texts of spells were the books. So not only did they have them just in the text, but now they started to appear in books. The most important, or should I say the most popular, was the Book of the Dead. Ooh. This is huge. This book of spells would be continued of use up until the late period. And I believe they found a Book of the Dead in Hatshepsut's temple.
Oh, wow.
In the Bahadir temple, I believe they found a Book of the Dead there. Because there's, I think, a couple of them. And I believe in my class, we actually looked at some of the pages in one of them. Sorry.
That's cool.
Yeah, they're super legit. And they're not even, a lot of them are written on like papyrus or something, like not regular paper. Like they have their own thing. Yeah. This stuff is old as shit. I don't know how it's still around. This book was also known as Coming Forth by Day, and such spells in it could be found in pyramid and coffin texts. So they started to understand, like Egyptologists, like all of these texts are coming from this book. So they started to put together, like, this is becoming some sort of ritual that you go through.
Oh, yeah.
When you are passing on.
Huh.
So, honestly, I think that's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
These spells and such texts would be inscribed on also figurines, cloths, amulets, and of course the tomb wall. So they started appearing everywhere. So people are like, they're taking this super serious. Like they wanted to make sure that if you were passing on, that you were protected. Yeah. That you were going to pass those trials and get to the afterlife with ease. That you were not going to struggle. Because if you didn't have those texts to protect you, then you were on your own. And it could be easier to struggle. To hold Osiris to the god status he was, temples were held in his name. In ancient Egypt, there were two different types of temples that people would go to. The first were the cult temples, that a specific god is celebrated in their own temple. So a lot of them, like if we ever cover like Hathor or Sekhmet and some of the other gods, they would be like even Horus, they would have their own temples that people would go to celebrate or to worship. Because that's part of the cult temple is worshiping one specific god. I'm sure they may have had like a huge pantheon type temple, but I don't think that's common for ancient Egypt. They mostly had their own separate one. Yeah. It's just like pretty cool.
That is cool.
So cult temples are normally where the population was east of the Nile. So a lot, the east and west Nile, like the the east and west side have such high significance because the east is where the sun is rising, so it gives everything life.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the death stuff or anything to relate with funerary or death would be on the west side, because that's like the sun going down and dying. They took everything literally.
That makes sense.
It's wild.
Gotta look at the sky.
Yeah, they amazing astronomers without even knowing it, because they like figured out like proportions and stuff, and how it's crazy because they call it still fucks me up that Upper Egypt is the east and like Lower Egypt, or no, Lower Egypt is east and Upper Egypt is west.
That's so confusing.
But it's weird. It's like opposite from what we know. And it's just like, it fucks with my head every time.
That's confusing.
These locations were also built where they believed importance occurred leading to that god's temple. Multiple gods can be worshipped in the same temple if their being is related to one another. Like for Isis, Horus can also, and probably Nephthys could be worshipped in the same temple because they all have some sort of correlation to one another.
Yeah.
And even if they had like Isis and Hathor, because they are very similar to one another, like they kind of combine the two, that both of them could be worshipped in the same temple, I believe. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, I would probably need to like really look into it, but that's from my general understanding from the readings. Sizes also varied of these temples due to the community it was set in. Some were very large, while others were very tiny compared to like if it was a big community or small. So those were cult temples. Funerary temples, on the other hand, are different. These temples were normally constructed in the west of the Nile. Each temple was associated with a particular pharaoh. So I believe the west of the Nile, the West Nile, is where all of like those pyramids are, where a lot of like tombs are. I believe maybe Valley of the Kings and Queens, as far as I know, where a lot of like the burials are, is where those funerary temples are. They're held here as the west is where the sun sets and dies, technically. In the Old and Middle Kingdom, temples were connected through their pyramids, but would change to the desert. So yeah, Valley of the Kings and Queens. You can see this shift. It's crazy how they just really developed mummification processes or just buildings and everything. It changes.
That is crazy. We have a guest star.
Hi.
Doesn't want to be on the show.
Wow. What a loser. What are you doing?
You're just listening?
I'm just listening. What's up with her?
We have a live audience.
She's cuddling.
She's our manager, or meownager.
Man.
Now I lost my spot.
Oh, man. I don't remember.
Okay. The special connection with Osiris is that he was celebrated in the funerary temples, even though he technically is a god, as he would become the king of the underworld through his death and resurrection. Funerary temples held sacred religious importance for the area of its people. So having just a lot of the rituals through the mummification processes and whatnot, they were held in these funerary temples. We see Osiris as the god who decides one's fate, but he is a god of rebirth. Holding the flail of fertility, this means he also helps grow the crops and vegetation around Egypt. His cult following started in the Nile Delta, growing to Memphis, eventually spreading throughout Egypt. So he wasn't celebrated by everybody at first because like his story, because he was technically a pharaoh first. Yeah. So him being labeled then as, and it's even believed that he was a real person, like a real pharaoh in Egypt, who then his story just became myth, that he may have been slaughtered by his brother, and they supposedly brought him back because his son became like the king. And it just, a lot of stories have some truth, but then they just become fantasy into a myth. Yeah. A lot of times, or a legend, really. And Egyptologists are like, he could have been real. We're not sure. Because a lot of like their stories is just like their mythology is very interesting to like, how did they think of these stories? Is there any truth to them? Like, we don't know. Lastly, I want to touch on the people who work to resurrect Isis.
Ooh, interesting.
The first is, did I say Isis or Osiris?
You said Isis. But...
Oh, sorry, I meant Osiris.
Okay, that makes sense.
The first is Isis. Isis was worshipped throughout Egypt as she would help mothers and children and even had the ability to restore life.
Mm.
Later in Egyptian mythology, many connected her with Hathor. So she is really big into this because she is the one who pretty much brought him and her sister Nephthys brought him back together to his pieces. Like, without her help, there was no way that he could have been brought back to life.
Wow.
Unless someone did something.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Next is Horus, god of the sky. He relentlessly fought Seth and would eventually become the embodiment of the living. So he became like a living pharaoh, but he was also the god of the sky. And he is also important when it comes to the story because, he fought to get Seth out of power, and he just fought to help his father, his mother, and the people of Egypt because he knew that like how bad Seth wanted to be king, and he was like, nah, he's not going to be a good king.
Yeah.
The last tied to the king of the underworld is Anubis. I briefly touched on him in the beginning. He's like a gatekeeper. As another god of the underworld, he is well connected to the mummification process, which these who performed the rituals also held Anubis to like a high standard, like a lot of them, because he is appearing to look like, I think it was like a jackal, like dog. So he would pretty much have like a dog face that a lot of people would see if you look him up. He has like a dog type face. Which is wild.
Weird.
Yeah. And so a lot of times, like these priests that would do the mummification would wear the mask of Anubis.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm picturing like a werewolf.
No, it's like a dog.
It's not like that, but it's like
No, it's like a legit dog.
That's insane.
Yeah. He is also part of the judgment of a person. So he is the one who helps Osiris in the judgment hall. But he's also the gatekeeper and kind of helps with going into the afterlife. So he's kind of like the help transition into it. But Osiris is definitely like a key figure to help those people move into the afterlife just because that's who they looked up to, because he was once the embodiment of the living and then now he's the embodiment of the dead.
Yeah.
So I always found him very interesting. Like his story is pretty short, but there is a lot to his story when it comes
fascinating.
down. Yeah, he's highly connected. He's probably one of the most highly connected Egyptian god that everybody somehow worshipped.
Yeah.
Because he was in everybody's life one way, your afterlife. Whereas like a lot of men wouldn't really worship like Hathor or Isis because they were the embodiment of motherhood.
Yeah.
But because he is the god of the underworld, like of death, that he's going to be in everybody's life one way or another. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that when this is just like common knowledge that I know from ancient Egypt, especially what you have when you're buried into the ground, you would find a lot of grave goods in ancient Egypt. Like a lot of burials that people, especially like in everyday life of people, when you would bury up their bodies, you would see a lot of grave goods, like a lot of like gold or just like foods and stuff like that they buried with them. Yeah. Because what they had on them is what they were going to take into the afterlife. So anything that they had would go with them. And that's why grave robbing, like the royal tombs, were so big in the 20s and before then. Like there was a time throughout history of ancient Egypt, where it was like a time, especially when the Romans came in and overtook, there was a brief time where grave robbing was just huge because they knew in these tombs there would be such high valuables, because these old pharaohs knew that in the afterlife they had to take everything to make sure that the life that they would be living in the next would be magnificent. So they would take, a lot of them would take their servants, a lot of servants, so a lot of them would be murdered to go with them into the afterlife. They would have a bunch of food, gold, furniture, jewelry, and then they would be like in their sarcophagi. They would have the coffin text written on them. And with King Tut, he also had a lot of his stillborn children with him in his tomb that they found. So, and a lot of like his other like family members and stuff tied to him. But that's pretty much that they carried so much about into their afterlife is what will help me in the next. So yeah, grave goods were just huge for them to use. And even it came down to the average person, because the average person, they knew that they were going to struggle more trying to be reached into the judgment hall of, and their heart be weighed with Mott, because they knew that they're just an average person.
Yeah.
Whereas like the royal, they had a higher chance of going straight into the judgment hall and finding and living up to Mott, and then going into their eternal life. But I always found that interesting, especially when I was doing my research, was just like how they cared so much about their afterlife. Like everybody prepped it. And that was just the number one thing that they found in it for King Tut's tomb. Like, this is going off it's going off topic from Osiris, but like it's also important connecting to him is that King Tut's tomb, because he was so young and his death was so sudden, his grave goods were not as significant as some of the other pharaohs who had a long line. His is small in compared to a lot of the other ones that we have found that have been robbed.
Yeah.
So it's like, I can't imagine how some of these pharaohs went into the afterlife with like how much they had, because a lot of them would have like any of their like camels and stuff. Like they would have like full on how they would carry them into like their little, like the seats, and then there's the servants would like carry them on their shoulders. Like they would have many of those in there too. They would have boats.
Wow.
So if they're going through like canals and stuff, they had boats ready for them. Like it's a whole thing. It's a whole process that they would go through. And they did this for years. Like their whole reign was prepping for their death.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. It blows my mind how much death is such significance into ancient Egypt society without people even realizing how important it was to them. Because it's not what you learned. Yeah. Not a lot of people realize that because when you think of ancient Egypt, you think of the pyramids and the Sphinx.
Yeah.
But when you really research the embodiment of ancient Egypt, it's so much more than that. Once you start looking at all of the obelisks, all of the murals, like you really start to see how their everyday life was and who they believed in, who they worshipped, and how they perceived them. Because their death god is way different than how we see a lot of the other death gods. And they were on a whole different level.
That's crazy.
And they are one of the oldest societies. And they had a lot of highs and lows, but death was always consistent.
Wow.
So I had a lot. This one didn't take as long for me to research just because there isn't a whole lot to stand on it. But I just thought I love this story. It's very interesting. Like when my professor like told us the story, I just fell in love with it. I thought it was just so interesting, even though, like, his wife is also his sister.
We're going to skim past that.
But that's common in those, it's not right, but it's common in those societies, especially in God status, because friggin' incest is not a thing to them that they care about because they're gods. Genetic deformities is not really in their DNA. But yeah, I really liked researching Osiris, because Isis is such a powerful figure too, and knowing that, like, that's his wife, and how they really ran as a team, because she mourned for her husband to go search for him. Like, she searched a long time to find his body parts. When she finally did, even with a fake penis,
oh God,
she still loved him.
Can't forget about that.
And had a kid with him.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. So that is Osiris. But
I think what I learned is everything that you said, because I didn't know any of that.
Yeah,
I've heard of Osiris, but, like, I didn't really know the story, so.
Yeah, and that's how it is a lot of times. It's like, people, when they think of Osiris, they're like, oh, ancient Egypt. And it's like, do you know anything more about it? And they're like, no. But that's how most of ancient Egypt is. It's like, you know the names, but you don't know the stories. Yeah.
That's true.
So I'm here to educate people who don't know, and I recommend you check out these books because they are super interesting, and you will learn a lot and the books too are very interesting. Like, they're not really a boring read, because ancient Egypt is quite interesting to read about.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, the entire time you're like, what the fuck? How did this society survive? Or like, really? It's amazing. I love it. So, yeah, that's from what I learned is a fake penis can still give you.
I can't get over that. That's insane.
But yeah, I learned too how important death is to these people.
Yeah, it is. They really cared. They wanted to make it worthwhile.
Oh yeah, they did everything.
Wow.
Oh.
Well, that was the episode.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us this week. Where can you find us, Kylie?
You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Historia the Podcast. You can send us an email at historiathepodcast@gmail.com. You can send us your comments, questions, ideas for stories.
Yeah,
your stories that you have, if you have any.
Yeah, let us know how we're doing.
Yeah. We want to know. We want you guys to talk to us.
Yeah, we want to grow as a podcast, and we would like to know your guys' thoughts of, like, how we're doing, what we could be doing better, what you would want to know more about.
Yes, please tell us all the things. We're hopefully going to be opening up some new social media platforms pretty soon, which is exciting. So we're just going to take things step by step, and hopefully this is a good year for us, you know?
Yeah, grow the podcast.
Yes! So glad to have you guys here with the ride.
Yeah,
the ride.
Yeah, thank you for joining this week. We'll catch you next time.
We have a fun one next week. We're going to both be talking. We're going to both be sharing a story, so it's going to be a fun-filled adventure.
I'm excited.
Woohoo! Okay. Bye!